So, just a couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. Does everybody know how to raise a hand? Not that we particularly need it with low numbers. You can actually wave at me and it's not a problem. But if you want to raise a hand, you go down to the bottom where it says reactions. And if you press on that, you should find a little hand that you can put up and put down again. So just to, hello, Serge. Hello, where are you? Where are you in the world? You have to unmute.
Yeah, I'm in Austria at the moment.
Austria, lovely.
Yes, long time actually.
Yes, good to see you here. So most people here at Alexander teachers. Caroline, you're not, I think, but everybody else here is an Alexander teacher, I think, are they? No. Okay, so are you a pupil, Franklin, or just interested?
I'm an old pupil. I stopped going to lessons maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So right. I was in training as an apprentice.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you're still, the interest is there. Lovely. Thank you. And Anna, what about you? Are you
I'm a piano and Alexander technique teacher. I was learned the technique by Judah Kupperman in Basel.
Oh yes.
Until 30 years. 30 years.
30 years ago. Yes. Yes. Yes.
And I practice now in Budapest.
Yes. Oh right. Yes. Lovely. And is anyone else not a teacher? Apart from no, everybody else is. Good. Just so we know where we are. And who's got a copy of my who's got a copy of my book? Just to can check in. Yes. And good. Okay. And has anyone seen my webinars or the podcasts from Robert Rickover? No. Okay. They're on my website there. Yeah, they're interesting if you're not interested. And okay. And you all know, does anyone not know my work at all? That's another question. You all are a bit familiar with my work. Excellent. Good. So I'll talk for 15 minutes or so, and then we'll open the discussion and do some explorations and generally have some fun. So just a little about me to start with. I started as a zoologist. I did a zoology degree a long time ago. And I was always interested in whole animals and what made them move and what drove them to do things and behavior and ecology and so on. And then I started a PhD and it was a disaster, quite simply. And I began to crack up and my back got there first, fortunately. And that took me to my first Alexander lessons, which were lovely because my nervous system was so jangled at that point and they were calm. And I was just a passive pupil. That's what they invited me to be. And it was wonderful at that moment. Nobody asking me to do anything, which was just what my nervous system needed. And it sorted the crisis. My first teachers were Carrington teachers. I realized very quickly that I wanted to train and left the PhD and started visiting training courses and ended up at Misha Magidov's, which is was a McDonald's school, which I enjoyed because it was vibrant and there was lots of life in it and lots of freedom to move and freedom to experiment. Very confidence building. And in the first term of that, I actually put on 7 pounds of muscle. Good old McDonald, up, down, out of the chair. And hello, David. And then I finished my training and built a practice, which everybody from our school did because we came out with confidence. We knew what we were doing, apparently. And within 6 months, I'd fallen apart. I wasn't handling what was happening. I was having funny turns in lessons, and I realized I needed more help. And I tried going back to my old teachers in school, and it didn't make any difference. And I realized I needed new input. And at that point, there was a choice of first generation teachers in London. And I chose Miss Goldie, partly because she was nearest, and partly because John Hunter had been there, and I very much admired John Hunter's work. And I took to Miss Goldie's lessons the passivity that I'd brought to my first lessons, which had actually never changed. They never asked more of me. And then my training didn't either. I stood there and somebody worked on me, and then I worked on them, but there was no how to do it for yourself. And Goldie very quickly made it clear to me that I knew nothing and that she wanted more from me. So if I asked her a question, she would say, "You ask me that? And you call yourself a teacher of the Alexander technique? Why, Mr. Alexander would be turning in his grave if he could see what you were doing in the name of his technique." Well, you don't say that to a new pupil, of course, but she did, a new teacher. She was fairly outrageous and outspoken. She was 86 at that time. You don't hold back when you're 86. And so I didn't mind the insults, actually, because I knew I was a mess, and other teachers used to put hands on me and go, "Oh, yes, you move well, everything's free, nothing's wrong." And I knew there was more going on than that. So the fact that she knew I was a mess was actually quite reassuring. So I just sort of bounced off the insults and thought, well, if she knows I'm a mess, maybe she can sort the mess. And so it went on with me being rather passive in the process until lesson 6, and she challenged me that day. How many lessons have you taken? 6, Miss Goldie. I don't know why you bother. You have not begun to think for yourself away from here. And she had me in tears all lesson. She just bombarded me with how useless I was and that I wasn't thinking. And part of my head was thinking, I don't need to take this. I could just walk away. And another part of me thought, I'll show the old bat. And so that evening when I went home, I was about to pick up my kettle, and I thought, no, I need to stop and think. So I did what I'd learned from my lessons of her, which was just to come to quiet and just see the kettle and not try and do anything. And she taught me to bring my mind to my brain and to stay out of my own way, as I then give consent to make the action, which was to let myself and my hand come forward to the kettle. And something completely different happened. My movements organized themselves in a way that they'd never, ever done so before. And I call it my kettle moment. And my hand was responsive, my whole body was responsive. And in that moment, I made a discovery about the technique. When I went back the next week for my lesson, I lost no time in telling her, but I didn't need to. She already knew that. And after that, I was in, as it were. I've realized later that she tested a lot of pupils in that way, around about lesson 6, lesson 7, lesson 8. And what I came to realize, and what she explained to me, was that this was what Alexander was doing, how he discovered the technique, that he wasn't thinking, I free my neck and then I let my head go forward and up and so on. He was coming to this quiet place, letting himself respond, from which, sorry, I'll just switch my phone off. And go away. Sorry about that. My daughter, and if I don't switch it off, she'll just ring back. And yes, so this was how Alexander discovered the process, that he didn't think his directions and then move. He came to this quiet place and then gave consent. And in that giving consent, he discovered the neck free, the head forward and up, the back lengthening and widening. So the primary control came out of the movement. It wasn't there first, and then we make the movement. So the way she put it was, we turned the technique on its head. And this was huge. And it's very different when one begins to discover how to live the life with one's technique the other way up. It all came out of this coming to quiet. But coming to quiet wasn't a sleepy place. It was a place in which one came fully alive. She would say the brain is waiting out for the new instruction. You're just waiting, like a cat waiting to pounce on the mouse. But it's an active waiting. It's an alive, aware waiting, so that when the moment happens, it happens dynamically and something can evolve. The nervous system can sort it for itself. Now, this really appealed to me as a zoologist, because dogs don't go around thinking, how do I free my neck? It organizes for them. It organizes for the cat in that moment of jumping on the mouse. So I think there's something quite amazing in this process that really brings something to life for us. Anyone resonating with this so far? Anyone want to comment so far on this? Yeah. Anyone want to speak? Michelle?
I have a question. Did you say that the primary control comes out of the movement or out of the quiet, or both?
Both, yes. The quiet then gives consent to the movement, and the nervous system organizes the movement for you. And then the primary control is discovered in that movement, as it were. It emerges in that movement. There's a lot of talk nowadays about emergent movement, and I think this is what we're getting. Tessa?
I'm just thinking of Alexander's book, you know, when he goes through the use of the self. It's almost like he did discover initially all those directions, but then he had to turn it.
Well, I've done a lot of historical research in the last year, and use of the self isn't actually how it happened, to be quite fair. I think it's what we've got in use of the self is actually one thread in a much, much bigger tapestry. So what I'm seeing, because if you read his very early articles, they're not, the head-neck relationship is quite simply not there. It's all about the breathing. It's all about the primary control. I'm going to be releasing a new course on this in the autumn, but that's down the line. And I'm writing a second book about it at the moment. The primary control that he originally discovered was actually the movement of the breath, and that had to come out of this sort of quiet process. The directions came later. I think.
So the book's a bit of a confusion then, the fact that he spoke about certain things initially, and then when he discovered the inhibitory processes, things shifted. So it's a little bit.
Yes, I mean, he was an actor, not a scientist, and he presented a beautiful story that didn't confuse people by talking about his early discoveries, which actually were very different. So I think he gave something that he felt was the best that people needed at the time, and it certainly has been hugely inspirational, use of the self. But if one simply tries to follow that process, it's not easy, because it's not actually where he started. Is that horrific? But
no, that really helps, because to me, when I came across Miss Goldie's work, it's the only thing that made sense to me.
Yes.
I thought, but this is it. And then you go into the details of some of Alexander's writings, which I absolutely love. Many people don't, but they're amazing. But then, as you say, if some of the history can come out and make it clearer, I honestly think Miss Goldie's way just brings you right into the essence.
Yes, doesn't it just? And I think he used that sort of process initially to discover the breathing before he could then discover how to free his neck, because he was premature. His breathing was wrecked from birth, as it were, and he had to sort that first. So yes, but that's all.
Thank you. No, that helps, because I do think there's and I know you're working on this book, so it'll be very interesting.
Thank you. Michelle and then Julia.
I think she's been raising her own hand first if she wants to
Okay.
go.
Julia, then. Thank you, Michelle.
Hi, I'm just wondering if the process that he puts down in his books and the process that you went through, Penelope, I think we all go through as Alexander teachers in our training. Somehow that's a process we have to go through in order to learn how to turn upside down.
Yes, yes. I do think that
Bravery.
there's I mean, all sorts of disciplines. I've looked at this in all sorts of disciplines, Reiki, massage, various, dyslexia, attachment theory. The discoverer makes all these amazing discoveries. His followers then have to turn it into a method in order to teach it. So it's absolutely needed that happened. And then we need to go back to the discovery process and find out how to turn it back the other way up again. And so I think both are actually needed. I'm not, it's all valid. It all adds to the picture it all adds to the paint box we're using. Yeah. Michelle.
What you mean by primary control is different than what's generally considered. Is that what you're saying? That primary control, as you understand that Alexander originally meant, it was about the breathing. In other words, Tessa was asking a question and speaking about the head-neck relationship, and you said not that, but primary control. But by primary control, you mean the breathing mechanism, coordination, not the relationship between the head, neck, back.
In a sense, I'm using primary control as that aspect of the nervous system that organizes the whole system around it.
Okay.
And in fact, there's a whole load of primary controls. I mean, Peter Grunwald uses the eyes as primary control. And I think actually Alexander did too, but didn't realize it. If you learn Tai Chi, they get you moving from your dantian, from your belly. And they use that as the primary organizing point. So I think there's actually a number of primary organizing points. I mean, Alexander discovered the head-neck relationship, the head-neck-back relationship as a primary control. And there's good nervous system evidence now as to why that is so. But I think there are others. The breathing mechanism also will organize everything if one knows how to allow that to happen. So does that make sense? That's the sense in which I'm using primary control as an organizing system within the nervous system.
Well, yes, but that doesn't seem to be any different than what someone else means when they say primary control, but they're talking about the Alexander head neck.
Sure.
And you're saying something different.
Well, I'm saying there's more than one primary control.
Okay.
I'm saying that the first one he discovered, the first organizing mechanism he discovered was the breathing.
I like the phrase organizing mechanism. Because to me, it removes the conversation from what's assumed that we all understand or know about what's meant by primary control. So an organizing mechanism, there can be many of those. The habitual one in the Alexander world is the head-neck relationship, but there are other organizing mechanisms. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And
Okay.
I'd even put the word self-organizing into it, self-organizing mechanism. It organizes itself. You don't have to do it for it. It will. And it's now known that clouds self-organize. And if you put, water will self-organize and molecules will self-organize and atoms will this is so at all scales of existence, apparently. I'm reading a fascinating book on complexity theory at the moment, and it's part of complexity theories that things self-organize. And I think Alexander discovered it, was one of the people who discovered that for the body. And it was a profound discovery. But we can get too hooked up on the head-neck relationship and forget that there's a bigger picture there. Anyone else want to comment on this? Caroline, you just...
Hi, I'm not an Alexander teacher, just for everybody else. I'm just interested in that moment. After that, did everything change, the kettle moment? or the kettle awakening, or whatever you want to use. So you, up until this point, felt like you were weak, you were falling apart, you felt, I don't know, you use lots of phrases. I don't mean to be using the wrong ones, but I can kind of identify a little bit with you. And then what all of a sudden, so you allowed yourself, what was it again? You allowed yourself to kind of go into the quiet place and freely come to that kettle. But after that moment, then did everything change? Every time you move, did that change?
Well, I wouldn't put it quite like that. I had the option to stop, to really stop. And of course, you know that in life, sometimes we take that choice and sometimes we don't. In fact, most of the time we don't, because you can't go from a place of no consciousness to a place of 100% consciousness overnight. It's a bit like, you know, getting off your sofa and going for a walk, thinking you're going to run a marathon one day. You've got to do some training. But I started on that consciousness stamina training, as I actually think of it, actually, because the more often I stopped, and the kettle, I think, was the one I probably worked with first. Every time I came to the kettle, stop and let that happen all over again. And we call that coming back to first principles, because it's easy. The nervous system will try and change it into, oh, of course, I know what to do now. You know, I'll just pick up the kettle like I did last time. And that won't work. One has to come back to that moment of quiet. And Goldie really encouraged me to keep finding those moments. I think the next one I found was washing down the shower. And I found that my arm just moved. So they were sort of fleeting glimpses to start with, but gradually they came together. And there was a second thread. That was the first huge discovery from her work. But and that sort of come to quiet work is very often what's portrayed as Miss Goldie's work. But then there was a whole second thread, because, you know, I said I put 7 pounds of muscle on in my training, and I thought of myself as strong and my back as strong. And within a couple of lessons, Goldie had actually picked up there was a fix in there that was keeping me nice and upright, and she unfixed it. And I was back in a slump, which was horrific. And I slumped for the next 6 months. I just didn't know how to sit up. And with her hands, she brought me back into life. She built my muscles up in a totally different way. And I now understand she built them from the core, whereas my training had a bit more brought in the outer back muscles. She brought in the core muscles. And then and that was much more integrating to my body, so that when I then found strength, my legs were linked to my back, my arms were linked to my back. I moved in a different way than I'd ever moved before. And what puzzled me about her work in that was she wasn't just working on the head neck as the primary place to work. She did an awful lot of tapping my hips and tapping my ribs and tapping my hips and tapping my ribs. And I always had to stay in charge. I was never to give her my weight, which I thought, okay, fair enough, you're 86. Why should you want to hold my weight? But it wasn't that. She wanted me to be holding tone. And she built up a new coordination in my body using a biomechanical model, I felt, that was completely different to anything I'd met so far. She did things to me like she really twisted my elbow round and then twisted my wrist the other way and brought my shoulder right forward. And it's like, what's this about? And I was sort of putty in her hands, but it could be quite uncomfortable. And I thought, what is she doing here? And then, you know, when I rode my bike back from the station afterwards, I go, wow, I've got a back. And I can go up this hill in 3rd gear. So something was changing and I did not understand it. And so there's this interplay between the strength tone side of the technique and the come to quiet, because she needed me to be in that quiet place to bring that work about. Now, when I finished working with her, I worked with her for 4 years. And then I thought, you know, this is so different, but what have I got? And it set me on a 30-year quest to discover. And I went back to John Hunter, who had worked with Erica Whitaker in the meantime. So I worked with Erica, and she added another part of the puzzle. And then I was doing Bates work already, natural vision work. I went to Peter Grunwald from Bob Britton, I discovered functional anatomy. I was already doing the breathing, which John Hunter had introduced me to, but I also worked with Jessica Wolfe. I did some craniosacral therapy that introduced me to the world of tensegrity and Thomas Mayer's work and the anatomy trains. And by then I was in a different place in life. We'd moved first to Sheffield, then we'd moved to Ireland. And in Ireland, I'd fallen very ill. This was back in 2006, 2007. And I had a couple of years where I was really out of it. And after that, I had to build strength again. And I felt that illness was very much a sort of Miss Goldie process, because I just had to come to quiet and surrender. There was nothing I could do. Nobody knew what was going on. Not even the alternative people who usually did. Nothing worked. None of my methods worked. All I could do was surrender and trust I would get better, which eventually happened. But I then had to build up a lot of strength. And I kept working with what I'd learned from Miss Goldie, that come to quiet, let the right thing do itself, and kept waiting for the strength to come back in that she had got for me. And it never did. And I did some yoga and I did some swimming and they helped. But I was thinking, there's a missing piece here. You know, what was she doing? What was all this tapping about? And then in 2016, somebody put me onto the work of Jando Masuera and his initial Alexander technique. And I took a lesson with him. Has anyone had a lesson with Jando? Yeah, and you'll know it's pretty different. So he's getting you to do strong pulls for yourself that he was also asking the same questions as me of how did the technique evolve? How did Alexander actually do it? But he was interested in the biomechanical side and also the constructive conscious control, the really conscious thinking side of things. And he'd also looked at the Delsart link that Alexander advertised himself as a Delsart teacher right at the beginning in 1902. And what was that about? And he came to the conclusion that Alexander had learned to do these pulls on himself. So that's what he teaches. And you organize it from your brain and you do these strong pulls. And in my first lesson with him, which was online, he was getting me to do these. And I was thinking, this isn't Alexander. This is too strong. It's too doing. And I was thinking of walking away, as apparently an awful lot of senior teachers have done when they've taken their first lesson with Jando. And then something made me realize that the pulls he was bringing about were exactly these rather strange moves that Miss Goldie did with me. And that at the end of the lesson, he had got me to bring about in myself what Goldie used to bring about in me. So at that point, I was very, very intrigued. And so I took 20 lessons with him, I think. And it was the missing link. He taught me how to bring about this very different biomechanical balance that there is good evidence that Alexander was using for myself. And again, I think that's incredibly important because a point that Goldie made and Marjorie Barstow I heard make the same thing and say the same thing is that the modern technique has become rather too passive. It's become rather too not doing. I've heard some senior teachers say this as well, that non-doing gets confused with not doing, and it's all too much about release and lying down, and it wants to be about living and waking up the energy, not sort of a nice quiet let's put you to sleep session, but a session that wakes one up and energizes one and gets the spring going and is anti-aging. And after the work with Jando and learning to do it for myself, I started feeling like a 12-year-old. And I couldn't have done that picture on the front of the book with that great spring without having done that work. So anyone like to comment on this side of it? Because it's absolutely the two sides of the coin. Sergey.
So how do you how is that compatible with self-organizing?
Well, that's a very, very good question. And I must admit, it was a few years before I really felt I had the answer to that. I think what one is doing with directions, I think the inhibition is something that any animal can do. As I say, the cat can stop and wait for the moment to pounce on the mouse. And in that moment, the self-organizing happens. But I suspect directions are something that humans do. because we can consciously use directions to, oh, excuse me, I must just plug my computer in. We can consciously use directions to open out tensions. I mean, I guess an animal does it by yawning and stretching, but we can do something more precise, more conscious than that. And so I think the first part of what one does with these pulls is actually repairing work, as it were. It's opening out the corkscrews of the legs so that they actually, the balance of muscles come back into play. Likewise, the muscles of the arms, because so often the flexors are overworking and the extensors aren't working enough. And with these pulls, one's balancing those muscles up so that everything starts working in a balanced way. Once that becomes part of, once one gets those muscles that have been asleep back functioning, then they're available to the central pattern generators and the organizing mechanisms that organize the movement.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to
the
get
experience
that.
Provides the experience somehow complements the self-organizing. The experience of the pulls, it complements that self-organizing pattern eventually.
Yes, because a lot of our muscles are actually quite switched down. They're either locked long or locked short. And you know, and one needs to wake those all up and get them back into an expanded elastic state. And I remember one of the first times the whole thing self-organized. I was walking along one of those endless airport corridors and thinking about seeing the corridor in front of me, and suddenly all the pulls that I'd done with Jando all came into play together, and my back widened and my feet organized themselves into the right line and my pelvis went into the neutral, and I was able to, you know, walk in a much freer way down that airport corridor. But it came just through looking, and the muscles were obviously, the new patterns were sufficiently available now to the nervous system that it was able to pull them all in, because the nervous system can only recruit the muscles that are available.
Penelope, how can you verify that experience? What you said, that it organized itself. How do you know that?
Well, my feet organized themselves. If you've got my book, you'll know that I work with the feet in that alignment.
Yeah.
And if I was working from the previous way, my feet would have been slightly turned out. They organized themselves to come into that alignment.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed my lower back widened and my breath came free right down to the base of the pelvis, whereas it would have been a bit more in the upper body. So that's the sort of verification I was using.
Was it visual then?
It was sensorial. I could look down and see that my feet were in the right orientation, and it's true. One has to give a glance down at feet and see whether what you think is actually what's really happening. I could put a hand on my back and actually verify that it was no longer constricted; it was actually opening. And I think the breath, you know, the breath is something we can be aware of. We can know where the breath is happening, but if needed, I could put my hands on my back and actually feel the fact that there's now expansion going there in a way that there wasn't before. So I think one can use both vision and hands to verify, because you're right, we can't just use sensory and expect it to give us the right answers. And I think it's very useful to learn to use vision and one's own hands. Apparently Alexander did that sometimes. I've read in some of his accounts of lessons that and I think there's I can't remember the references right now. One of, I think maybe even in CCC, he says, you know, and the person didn't think that their legs were doing this, so I got them to put their own hands on their legs, and then they found they were. So I think he was getting people to use their own feedback, and more than we know, which is interesting. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Did you say you'd had lessons with Jando?
Yeah, quite a lot of lessons too.
Yes.
Over the years, since that time we met. I think he was teaching in Ireland.
That's right. We met in Ennis, didn't we? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Ennis. Yeah.
Yes.
And yeah, I have a lesson like once a month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you ever notice that the pulls sometimes do themselves?
No,
No. I think
maybe I'm lacking the the quiet bit.
Well, Jando doesn't particularly teach the quiet bit, but interestingly,
No.
when one learns to put them together again, the pulls will actually bring one to a state of quiet.
That sounds very attractive.
Yes, there's, you know, for a while I thought there was, you know, they were very much two separate ways, but the more I've worked with the both, the more they start to come together.
Okay.
Because after all, you know, Goldie used them together and Alexander used them together. They weren't separate. So
Yeah.
it's like they are, as I say, I think they're two sides of the same coin. And interestingly, one of the people who's worked with me for a while, she had recently a huge neck operation. And she came round and wanted to die basically from the pain and discomfort of it. And she said the thing that got her through was actually very gently and with the breath thinking the pulls, because it kept her in an expanded state and she wanted to tense against the pain. And she was using the pulls in this very quiet way to actually keep her system able to flow and cope with what was happening, which I think was amazing. Yeah, so they don't have to be used in always in a strong way. Yeah, anyone else want to comment on this side of things? Anyone resonate with this as a Michelle? Do you want to?
I resonate with it for sure. I've been away from the technique for a few years because I found myself a mess, as you were describing, that I was not able to affect in my students or in myself the kind of results that I expected to be able to. I just kept feeling like there was something I wasn't getting. I just don't really understand this. And what I've turned to lately is more physical work, more a deeper level of engagement. So I'm still in the process of exploring some another methodology, a more fitness based, but because I've been looking for this activation. And I mean, when I see pictures of myself as a child, I was already so crumpled. So I know that studying the technique in my late 20s and into my 30s, that I benefited greatly, but it didn't address these deeper underlying issues of weakness, of imbalances.
Yeah.
So
wow.
that's where the work of the pulls is really intriguing to me. And yeah, because no amount of inhibition and direction, as I understand it, is going to address the scoliosis and the protrusions of my spine. I've been at it. It's not working. I need something with more vigor.
Yes.
So that's why the pulls are really appealing to me.
Yes. And interestingly, it's the women in the technique who talked about the need for strength. I mean, I guess, you know, MacDonald was a very strong man. Mind you, he brought in pulls, but Goldie was very hot on building strength in someone like myself, who was at that point very weak. And she kept saying to me, you haven't got the strength to be an Alexander teacher. You have to build a strong back first. And again, you can read the same in Barlow.
I studied in the MacDonald tradition.
Yeah. So, but it's putting it together with this internal. It's getting again, my contribution to this, I think, is because following on from doing the yoga, which involved a lot of deep core work, and I was again aware that Goldie was actually activating my core. So how does one bring that in? And so I got more and more interested in those very deep muscles and activating those very deep muscles alongside it. And interestingly, before I did the Miss Goldie work, my daughter came home. Before I did the Jando work, my daughter came home from traveling and university and so on, and she'd got into fitness work and she tested my core. She put me in a plank and then lifted one leg, and promptly my hips collapsed, and she lifted one arm and promptly my shoulders collapsed. And she said, Mum, your core's really weak. you need to do press-ups and push-ups every day for 6 months and for half an hour a day, and then you'll start getting strong again. And I thought that sounds far too much like hard work, so I didn't do it. And then after a few lessons with Jando, I tried exactly those same moves, and there was that core. So, but to me, one has to combine it with his inner breathing work as well. It's the balance between the two that really engages the strength and starts to be able to get deeper into scoliosis patterns. And, you know, how far any individual can go, I don't know. But I've certainly had several people say, oh, wow, my scoliosis has opened a bit more. And certainly I have a very slight scoliosis, but I can completely open it when I do certain pulls. But it has to come right from within. Whereas the McDonald work was a little bit more on the outside, and it doesn't touch the bit that one needs, I think. Again, I don't want to diss McDonald. I don't want to diss any of them. They were all great men. But I think we need to know more now. How does that sound?
Accurate. I don't fault my training. It's what I chose, and I took as much as I was able to receive from it at that time, and I've just continued on my search for other things.
Yes.
So I'm glad for this work. I mean, I you know, I haven't worked directly with you. I've only worked with the book, and I have a friend colleague who's been working. She's been in the book group. So I've been playing with as much as I understand about it, and I notice changes, especially when I'm experiencing pain. It definitely helps. And I just need to go deeper to even more core.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also not fault the coming to quiet, because I think, like you, I could have used a good talking to many times, many moons ago, like what it is. I could probably name the number of times when I've actually come to quiet. And it's been like, oh, it's this huge relief. But to actually do that, like to live from that, I still aspire.
Yes. Well, it keeps me healthy, because I mean, some of you know I had chronic fatigue syndrome for 33 years, and it's the only, when I'm in this quiet place, it's the only thing where I'm really healthy. So I have a major reason for keeping going there. And the pulls, of course, have also really helped there, again, to strengthen me out of 30 years of not being able to do anything strong or aerobic. So, you know, it's all been a huge part. One needs a reason to do these things, but it's so much nicer to live from this place of quiet. Quiet, alive, dynamic, not just quiet. Yeah. Anyone want to speak to all that? And then I'll talk about the book study club. Tessa.
Sorry, I had a disruption here, so I might be asking something that was discussed. But when you talk about core, what are you referring to? Because there's so much controversy around core.
Yeah, okay, good question. The core to me, obviously the psoas is one of those deep muscles, but the whole of the deep front line, as okay, Matt defines it. So you've got all the adductors are in there, and they're a huge group of muscles. The pectineus, I've discovered, is a very important part of that. We've recently made some huge discoveries about the deep hip rotators, which I think are very little known. And then of course you've got the quadratus lumborum and then right up into the what I call the psoas of the neck, the longus colli and capitis, which hardly anybody knows about. And in a sense, I think those very deep the core muscles of the neck are those ones that balance those tiny, what's they called, capitis, forgotten my anatomy, you know, those tiny little ones right at the base of the occiput, the occipital muscles. Does that answer the question? And then of course you can add in what you want. Is the transversus abdominis core or not? I mean, it works in layers, doesn't it? And so it's because that's how the nervous system pulls it in. the first thing, if you go to move, the first thing has to happen is these deep stabilizers have to activate. And then the next layer out activates, and then the next layer out activates. And then finally, the system is stable enough. And then you can actually bring in your hamstrings and your glutes and whatever and actually move. So, you know, is the glute superior, is the superior part of the glute a core muscle or not? Because actually that's part of that deep stability. So you can argue it anyway, but it's the stabilizing function. And all muscles, of course, have a stabilizing function. And I think it's interesting when we start to look at muscles primarily as stabilizers and secondarily as movers, which is something Alexander knew. Michelle again.
Just wondering if you've been exploring also the role of organs and fluids in terms of stabilizing and finding energy and strength.
Yeah, I mean, Alexander in his first book, and he's talking all the time about bringing the organs into the right placement. So you've got to get the skeleton in balance with the muscles in a way that brings the organ into the right placement. But then I do a lot of working with the breathing, actually, to relax the organs themselves, because you've got to have the organs relaxed, but yet the muscles around them working. And then the organs can properly function. Is that what you mean, or are you actually?
Yeah, I mean, just from my study of body-mind centering, and really that the organs can provide support for movement. For example, raising your arm in a muscular way versus raising your arm with an awareness of lung provides just a really different quality and capacity to the movement. Yeah, just the stabilizing force, and also, you know, the hydraulics of our fluid systems.
I haven't particularly gone into the latter, but certainly, I mean, if one raises one's arm in a dynamic relationship to breath, and everything needs to be in dynamic relationship to breath, and the breath, after all, the breath wave goes through the whole torso, and indeed it goes fluidly through the whole system. So that's how I would think about that, that the breath is actually activating everything all the time, and there's nothing ever static.
Yes, and that example I think wasn't ideal, because it's also sort of, what is it to do a twist from the liver, or, you know, be moving from your kidneys as well? Yes, absolutely, the breath is underlying all the movements. But my experience, you know, doing yoga from an organ standpoint versus a muscular or skeletal system standpoint is just dramatically different in term of the quality of the movement and the capacity for movement.
Yeah. I haven't played with that, but I'm always interested in people coming into their volume, and I think one always needs to be allowing that volume of the body to be in an expansive and free place and fluid place. And that there needs to be, Philip Shepherd, who's another person I've worked with a lot, the embodiment man, he talks about how we separate the energy flow through the body into a set of rooms. So the head is a room, and this is a room, and this is a room. And actually the whole thing needs to be a fluid corridor. And I think that's just a very nice image. But as you say, there are then support systems within each of that part of that corridor.
And certainly what we're learning about fascia.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been doing a lot more myofascial release as part of this, because it brings hydration into the tissues. So I can direct and direct and direct, but if the tissues are dehydrated and locked up, I'm just not going to get any movement there.
Yeah. No, it's all part and parcel. And, you know, again, I think we need to broaden Alexander's technique. We've rather isolated ourselves with our language, and we need to make much more connection out into the world of somatics, and to
recognize there's a lot of people making great discoveries out there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that we can all talk and share together, and that they can inform us and we can inform them. I think it's incredibly important to get this sort of dialogue going more. So yeah, I mean, Bonnie Brainbridge Cohen's the one you're working with? Yes.
I've studied with teachers of body mind centering. Yes. Yeah.
Anyone else want to talk about these aspects? So the book study club is because, you know, those of you who've got my book will know it's a big book and there's an awful lot in it. When I first got it out of the box and picked one up, oh gosh, it's heavy. So people asked for support going through it. So we formed the book study club, and we meet once a fortnight, once every 2 weeks, and for an hour and a half. And each 2 weeks, we take a small section of the book, and people read it beforehand, and they play with the explorations themselves. And then also everybody has a study buddy. We pair everybody up who wants to. And so one also works with one's study buddy so that you learn to talk somebody else through these procedures, and also you get to be on the receiving end. Because again, in our trainings, most of us were at trainings where it was more, the communication was more through hands. Whereas again, on the very first training course, the instruction was much more to stand back and look, to be more aware of what was happening for somebody just by looking at them, rather than by feeling out what was happening for them. And then to be able to verbalize what somebody needs to do to change the patterns. And that, I think, working online is a very good discipline, whether we intend to work with pupils online or not. But it's a wonderful thing to go through, because you don't have your hands, and you have to use your eyes and your observation and your sensing and all your awareness and your voice. And you have to be very clear in what you're directing. And your pupil on the other side has to, again, to really take charge of what instructions they're giving themselves. And are they getting in the way of that, or are they staying out of the way, so that the self-organizing mechanisms can then come about, and learning to get feedback from that. Because again, you know, when one works with pupils, if you ask for feedback and you say, yeah, well, how was that? And they go, yes, can you tell me some more? Yeah, it was nice. Yes, what was nice? And eventually they say, my neck, it's nice. Yes, what's happened? Oh, my neck feels freer. Yes, thank you. And it's really helpful to pupils to be able to clarify for themselves what happened, and then to know also that they brought it about. Because then, and I find pupils love this process. And if they are in the room with me, I can't resist putting hands, because hands are so nice. So, you know, sometimes I use hands, sometimes not. But the goal is always that at the end of the lesson, the pupil will be able to take something that they've learnt away and do it at home, and know that they can do it. And they're very excited to be able to do that. So there's a chance in the book study club to really play with that whole process, whether you're going to use it, you know, online or in a hands-on lesson, so that it's a safe situation where you can make balls of it, and, you know, and get feedback for what's happening, and refine the way to make the language your own, and really learn the process. So and we take the group, each group takes its own speed. It's turning out to take about 1.5 years. To start with, I thought, oh, it's 9 months. Actually, it takes more like 1.5 years to go through the whole book. But there's no upfront commitment, so people stay as long as they feel is useful, or as long as they, you know, until there's a family commitment or something and they have to drop out. But a lot of people do stay through, which is wonderful. It's just €25 a month, so it's very affordable. I've kept it very affordable. And it's a monthly subscription. And as I say, you can stop at any point. So there's really no risk. And for those who don't even have 25 a month, there's a 20 a month option as well. So what else do I want to tell you about that I've forgotten in this moment? The whole process builds. Those of you who got my book know that it builds through the book. And again, doing it together when we get into the sessions, I go through all the explorations again, so people get a real chance to do it with me, to ask questions. People can get individual help on individual problems, and everybody learns from that. And each part is really integrated before we go on to the next part, but because it builds, we're always going back and, say, bringing the breathing in each time that we've learnt it, and bringing in the expanded field of awareness and so on. So earlier work is being reviewed all the time as we go through, and by the time people finish, they're different. You know, the people tell me that pains that were there for years, that classic lessons haven't sorted, have gone, that they're feeling stronger, more confident, more alive, more springier, they're feeling younger. So it's a very exciting process to see this happening. So any questions about all that? Does it sound appealing?
Yeah, I have the impression, I've read a little bit of the book, not that much, but I have the impression that you are attempting to breach the rather conventional and sometimes narrow understanding of Alexander's writing. Would that be a valid?
Bridget, yes. You know, Alexander's writing.
Not breach. I mean, to break through this sort of sometimes a little bit narrow understanding of things.
Yes.
Or very dogmatic, actually, approach. That was my training experience.
Right. Okay. Yes.
Conditioning.
Yes.
Sort of
Yes. Well,
approach,
it's. I think there's a whole elephant there. I think Alexander was on a discovery process himself throughout his entire life, and he knew the work wasn't done. And then those very first teachers who worked with him, they were struggling to understand from him, and he couldn't really put it into words very easily. The science wasn't there then, the anatomy wasn't there then. They didn't have, I mean, he came up with words as best he could, but he said at the time they weren't really adequate. And so I think those young teachers who worked with him, they all really struggled to try and make sense of it, and they began to work together to try and make more sense of it, and they each took away a piece. And it's so sad that after he died, they got split as they did, and they stopped talking to each other. And that was just really tragic that happened, because I think there was so much each of them knew that they could have been still sharing, but they weren't. And so we end up with these divisions, which of course we're all really trying to heal now. But every one of their trainees then is still struggling to understand what their master is still struggling to understand what Alexander himself is to. So the struggle has carried on. And what I've tried to do is put with the science and the anatomy and bringing in knowledge from other disciplines, actually to bring a clarity to it. And I think the proof is in the pudding, in that the explorations work, and that it still does feel like Alexander technique at the end of the day. So, because some people have said to me, shouldn't you be calling your work something else? Well, no, because it still works by the basic tenets of Alexander technique, and it does still feel like Alexander technique. So I don't think it is something else. It's just a development. And of course, I'm not unique and special here. I've drawn on a lot of other people, and there's a lot of other people also doing this.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You have a lot of influence from different people.
Yeah, so I think, Goldie said to me, I asked Miss Goldie once, if somebody wants to train, should I send them to a MacDonald school or a Carrington school or a Barlow school? Who has the right answer? I said. And she looked at me and she said, you know the story of the 3 blind men and the elephant, which is just saying, everybody came away with a piece. Yeah. And I felt that she more gave me the whole elephant, and then I discovered more bits of the elephant. And like Michelle says about the structure of the organs, there's more bits of the elephant to find yet. So how does that sound? But as you say, we need to throw away the dogma and actually be much more exploratory in the process, because this wretched language of right and wrong, we really don't need it. It's really unuseful. David. Oh, you've muted yourself. Yeah.
That was accident, yes. Did you do anything, do is kind of a funny word, but how did you get out of chronic fatigue after 35 years? My daughter has it. I work on her. I mostly do table work with her extremely gently. It takes sometimes an hour and it improves her, but it's not, you know, it's not getting her completely out. Suggestions?
Well, the thing that finally worked for me, I mean, I covered a lot of bases over the years: Alexander, psychotherapy, nutrition, healing, osteopathy, you know, to get, and I think all that has to be done. But what in the end brought me out of it was something called nickel therapy, M-I-C-K-E-L.
Yeah.
Like nickel. Have you heard of it? And it's also called reverse therapy. And because very often with chronic fatigue, what you end up is managing it. You know, oh, I won't go out this evening because then I'll be too tired for tomorrow. I won't do this because then I'll not be able to do this. And, you know, one's always managing it and looking after oneself. And nickel therapy, it's a talking therapy. And it just says the root of it is, it's about body intelligence, that I'm not really listening to my body's needs. And if we don't listen to, say, the fact that we're talking to a friend and that friend is actually insulting us, and we don't actually acknowledge that, then we might discover that we have a screaming headache or a really acid stomach. And the screaming headache or the acid stomach are simply saying, this is not a pleasant situation, get the hell out, or say something back. And, you know, if one has been brought up to be a good girl and not listen to one's feelings, however that has come about, and no disrespect to any parent on this one, because these things happen, but it's, you know, one actually needs to pay attention. I think interoception is incredibly important. I talk about it in the book. You know, we talk about proprioception, we talk about vision and the external senses, but we don't talk about interoception. And interoception is about, you know, what's my internal drive in this moment, to go forwards, to run away, to eat, to, you know, it's that internal sense of what I need in this moment. Am I safe? Am I not safe? I just was so shut down. And this is, it was a very powerful method for me. It works for some people more than others. And it takes a certain amount of self-awareness to do. So it's very often what one does after doing all the other things. David again.
Yes, so you talked about coming to quiet. Were you already coming to quiet before you had the chronic fatigue? Did it help?
Oh yes, yes, absolutely. Yes, totally.
It seems to me like the interoception is probably part of that.
Yes, it is, because if you're not in a quiet state, you can't listen. You know, if you're running for your life, you don't notice the fact that you cut a toe off.
Yeah.
You only notice it when you get to the safe place, and then you look at your foot and say, my God, I'm missing a toe. How did that happen? You know what I'm saying there? So it's only when one comes to that quiet place that one can begin to notice oneself and whether one is hungry, tired, fed up, you know. So we have to come to that place where we can start to listen to ourselves. So that the coming to quiet has to be primary. But then it's also having the encouragement to notice it. And they have there's actually a form that I had to fill in. You know, if I noticed I had a symptom, actually to write down, right now my stomach's hurting. What am I doing? What's the thought that I had that I didn't acknowledge? What do I want to do instead? Now do it. Now notice what happens. So they're quite, you know, cognitive about it. Cognitive behavior therapy is often recommended for ME. It doesn't work. Nickel therapy does. The other thing they got me doing was having fun, which was amazing.
Yeah, she likes fun.
She likes fun. Yeah.
Yeah, she's having EMDR at the moment. She's just had her session. That was yesterday. I haven't checked in with her since.
Yeah.
But
all those things are helpful.
yeah,
I think one has to find the right thing at the right time, and
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it certainly
But-
was triggered by a bunch of traumas. So.
Right. Okay. So clearing the trauma is huge. Yes.
Yeah.
So, but you know, it's wonderful not to have to manage oneself anymore. You know.
I'm going to write that. Managing oneself.
Yes. It's life is for living, not managing. And this again is where the Goldie side of things, this just letting the body organizing. I'm not managing my head. I'm letting the body organize it for me. And it's magic, as it were, except it's not, it's science, but
well, it's natural, isn't it?
It's natural. And it
it's
happens.
Not magic, it's natural.
Exactly.
It just doesn't happen that frequently in common experience.
Sure. Yeah. And what one is learning through this is how to bring it about for oneself anytime one needs it. And that is just amazing to be able to do. Let's actually do an exploration, because I realize we've been talking and we haven't actually had any games. So let's just start with the very simple one of discovering how the eyes lead the head into balance. And because if you think about how many muscles there are in the neck, I did once count them up, and I forget whether it came to 38 or 68. I forget. It's a huge number of muscles in the neck. And if you just move your neck, just move your head around with a sort of just a doing way, you can perhaps pick up that there's 2 or 3 muscles actually doing the work, and the rest really aren't doing very much. They're just being pushed along. So now let's just let the come back still to center and let the eyes just see what's in front of you and just receive what you're seeing. So I'm looking at a soft toy that has wonderful sheen on the velvet, and there's all sorts of orange, wonderful orange colors in it. So I'm just receiving all that shape and texture and color and light and shade without bothering too much about what it is, but just receiving it and being aware that either side there's objects equally with all sorts of color and texture and light and shade. And I'm receiving those across a space. So this toy is at one end of that space, and actually at the other end of the space is me, which is the bit we tend to forget when we look out at the world. We tend to forget that I'm part of the scene. But actually it's so important to let ourselves be in the picture. And if you think about that, does something start becoming a little bit more three-dimensional? Are you aware of the things between you and the object? And so there's all this stuff either side of me as well that I can also receive. There's space to my left and space to my right, and things that are a bit shady. I can't quite see them clearly, but it doesn't matter. And now I'm going to just let my eye be slightly drawn by something to the right, and just let it slide along as if there was a great feather on my nose, a great expandable feather, or perhaps a paintbrush, or maybe even a laser beam. That it's measuring the space between me and what I'm seeing, and then it's brushing along. So it's brushing at the moment over a set of old Stat Newses, and it's sort of the feathers are rippling along all those spines of all those magazines. And so it's not just my eyes receiving, I'm sort of receiving texture. It's almost a kinesthetic element to seeing here. It's still this light and shade and form across the space. And as my eyes are drawn around to the right, my head's following. And my neck is, the muscles of my neck are all self-organizing in a beautiful dynamic balance, so that the head is actually moving completely freely on the neck, so freely that I've really not even been aware that it's happening. It's just doing itself. And when I've gone as far as is comfortable to the right, then I'm going to let my eyes just gently flow back, being just gently caught by the next thing and the next thing. My feather is sliding along, and feathers can slide with just as much interest over a piece of blank wall. So I don't have to jump from the ornament I'm looking at now to the picture. I can let the feather slide across the wall between the two. And you can also take that feather back through the skull, in fact, along the optic pathway, through to the visual cortex at the back, so that, because the eyes only gather the light, they don't actually see. It's the back of the brain, it's the brain that sees, and particularly the back of the brain. So just being aware that one is actually seeing from the back of the head, out through the space of the skull, out through the eyes, out across the space of the room to whatever it is that my eyes are seeing. And you might notice that brings in even more spatial awareness, a sense of being in an expanded field of awareness, where the whole room is present, and I'm present too. Michelle, are you okay?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot between vision and hearing, and my eyes are tired.
Yeah.
They're usually switched off, sort of go through in an unseeing way.
Yeah. So even just to play with just a tiny bit of movement, just between just an inch, and just receiving and being very gentle with them, just not asking anything of them. They're just receiving. They don't have to be sharp. They don't have to be clear. And they can operate at any distance. They might only want to operate very close up. They might not want the energy of working very far away, or they might just want to work far away. Let them choose where they want to see and how much detail they can cope with. And just very gently inviting them just to receive, but letting this gentle movement so that we are choosing to keep seeing. Because is anyone else aware that their vision tends to switch off the minute we take our attention, as it were, that we're often not seeing what's in front of us? Would anyone like to comment on how this has been, what's happening here? Did your neck self-organize beautifully? Julia?
And the first thing that happened to me was that I breathed.
Nice. That's always a good thing. Yeah. Anna, do you want to comment?
I feel quiet and sleepy.
Yes. Yes, so it's something that I think I read in Osho, that when one comes to quiet, the temptation is to fall asleep, but actually just to choose to keep seeing very quietly, just receiving. So it's learning to find that quietness and aliveness at the same time. But of course, if we've been charging around, the nervous system might just want to reset. Julia?
But also, I loved what you said about putting yourself in the picture too, because that's so important for one's own safety. And the funny thing about vision is this thing, blind panic. Your toe illustrated that very well, where you're not seeing and you're not aware, and you're not anywhere in the picture.
Yes.
And that this is a safety. Oh, I'm also here.
Yes.
So releasing, I think.
Yes.
I really like that you brought us back to ourselves.
It's this interplay. We have to come to quiet. And actually, the eyes are the most reactive part of the body. If we can bring the eyes quiet, we can very often calm the system. If I have an agitated pupil and it's just talking about something that's just happened, you know, what do you see in front of you? And they just keep talking. What do you see in front of you? Until eventually they agree to tell me what they see in front of them, and things change. They start coming present. And then if one could just let the eye move and arrive, and it's a very powerful little tool, this. Yeah. And it's, of course, a bit part of EMDR, David. Letting the eyes move laterally is very, very calming. Yeah. Anyone else want to comment on this? Franklin, how are you going on there?
It's interesting to see the back of the head, because I noticed that my peripheral vision, it suddenly broadened, opened up, and I noticed that I'm sitting and my legs, I noticed a bit more around the peripheral vision. So it was interesting.
So it brought you more into the frame.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So it became part of the scenery here.
Yes.
The environment, you know.
Lovely. Because we're so taught that we're separate. We're a separate thing. We're not any more than you can't, if you take a fish out of the ocean, you've got a dead fish. You know, you can't separate the fish in the ocean. It's and neither can we separate ourselves. Let's play a little bit with strength, just if everyone's got a few minutes to stay. Because I said I would play a strength game. Let's just do the if you want to stand up, I think it's useful to stand up for this. And you're just going to let's do something that what might be the classic way is just, we're going to think about releasing the shoulder joint and release an arm, release your arm to lift above your head, and then release it down again. So let's just use that as maybe those classic Alexander phrases. I can release into movement, and I can release the arm down again, and I can do less. And having done that a couple of times, just bring your arm back to horizontal, let's release it forwards and put it on, say, your desk or on a wall, and press, and just being aware of the quality of power you can then bring in, and strength. So just put it on something now and just let it press and see what quality of power and strength that brings in. Okay. Now we're going to do the same thing again, but we're going to do it, I'm going to direct you a different way. We're going to just, again, just being aware, if you're looking out, that brings your mind up to your brain, as Miss Golby would call it. But because you're looking from the back of your head, you can also be aware of yourself in that picture, and that just being aware without coming down where your hand is. So your hand's up way down there, your head's up there, your hand's way down there, and you're looking out, so your vision is that way out there. And then keep, so we've got this knowledge of where the hand is, and now we're going to send some direction. We're going to energize some direction down the hand and send it down. So I'm not going with it, and I'm not taking my mind down with it. And my mind's still, I'm still looking out, but I'm sending my hand away down to the floor so that it's going further and further and further and further and further from my head. And if I keep that going, if I keep sending my arm to the floor, there will come a point actually where it wants to raise up all by itself. So just keep sending your hands away down to the floor. And you might notice the fingers have to extend, because so often we sort of, we only go to there. Just let your fingers really extend, and they might even a little bit uncurl. And just, so you're sending energy, sending right energy right through to your fingertips. Yeah, Julia's is going up. That's it. Several arms now going up. That's it. And just keep sending that energy through to the fingertips, just flowing that energy along the arms. And you might be aware it's going along the back of the arm and the underside of the arm. It's not just going along the top of the arm, it's also flowing up under the arm. So if your arm's feeling a bit heavy, just find out where you need to flow it through the arm to let the arm lighten. That's it. Several arms coming right up. Once you've got it right up or as high as it wants to go, you can send it down again, but it's going to use exactly the same amount of energy. We're not letting it drop. We're keeping exactly that same amount of energy, taking it down again. So just play with that, going up and down, sending the arm away, seeing if it just wants to lift like a bird wing. That's it. And keeping that energy in it as it comes down again, keeping that energy flowing, and then keeping that energy flowing, bring it up again one more time, and put it onto your surface again. And again, just see what now happens if you send some force through it now, whether there's a different quality to what happened before. Walls are quite nice to use for this if you have a wall nearby, just to send it onto the wall and give a push through. See what you then notice. Keep that energy flowing. Keep the energy flowing and then increase it, and so that you're putting some force through it. And is it different to when we did it out of release? I haven't played this game quite like this before, so I'll be interested to hear the feedback. I made it up this morning. Anyone like to say anything? David, you're smiling.
Yes. So first of all, my arm wouldn't come up. So if I put down here, that's my right arm, it would go to about there, and I felt like tension there, and so I let it go. Tried that a couple of times. Tried left, and that was working better. And then I was able to get the right to just keep going. And I'd been pressing on basically a window catch. And before I could feel my shoulder, I could feel an ache in my shoulder here. And this time wasn't happening. I mean, I had raised my hand, let's say, or my arm first time, more by direction than by doing.
Yes.
So, because that's kind of a bit habitual now.
Sure. I know it's quite difficult to switch out of.
Well, I can do it, but I'm not sure I understood the first instruction or interpreted it, but definitely a difference in the shoulder here.
Yeah. But that's good, because I mean, when we think just to release it up, we're probably lifting more in the deltoid, which is this bit here.
Yes.
And when you direct through it with I'm hoping that the second time you got a greater direction going through, which is why it then went higher. And you get more of a balance of muscles around the arm, and that would actually downplay the deltoid.
I've never done that, release down first. I get clients to release down, but never thought to have them go further. Yeah.
But I think from what I'm hearing, the fact the arm went further and then that didn't hurt, it says to me you've used a different balance.
Yes.
Did you notice more that you had
that's the point.
different balance? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Anyone notice that they got a different amount of force or a different quality of force second time to first time?
Yeah, it's something to explore, something to work with a little bit more, to become more familiar with the experience.
Mhm.
But there is a difference. It's hard to put words to it.
Yes, it's unfamiliar, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Unfamiliar.
Yes. But again, you see, the way I would say it is you're getting a different balance through the arm, and then you actually get more engagement through into the back. So again, you might have noticed that I mean, my body's more used to self-organizing this, but I notice I get more into my back and my legs if I direct through in this way than if I just release the arm up. It's more just in the arm. I don't know if anyone relates to that way of thinking about it.
Yeah, it's a different way of living, actually.
Yes, yes,
It's different.
yes. So anyone else want to comment? Everybody's busy disappearing. I think we're running out of time. So
Yeah,
Anna or Franklin or Carolyn. Caroline?
Can I just ask you, because initially I thought it wasn't going to work for me, and it wasn't working on the arm I was working on, and then I swapped over to the other arm and it lifted up. But what is the direction? Just remind me again what the direction is. You're trying to release as much as possible, let that arm drop as much as possible to the floor and release through the fingers. I don't know what was different with one and the other, why one moved upwards and why the other one wouldn't move.
Well, one has different balances on the two sides of the body. So the important thing is that you manage to find it on one side. But I'm not just releasing down. It's as if one's flowing energy down. Now, this is something that I discovered in Delsart that I think Alexander was using early on. That first we let go, but then in order to get a movement, and this is something Carrington says actually, to get a movement, we actually have to flow energy. And he picks it up in something Alexander says in a footnote in Use of the Self, that to direct, you don't just direct to the mechanism. Thank you. Thank you, Julia. And I hope you might consider joining the book study club, perhaps. Yeah, good. Thank you. So we're not just sort of sending a hello hand. We're actually flowing energy down there that you don't just have to direct to the mechanisms, you have to energize it as well. And I think this is something that, well, he actually says it in that Use of the Self footnote. And that's what we're doing here, is we're energizing the direction, not just mentally directing, but we're energizing it as well. And that's, if one gets that right, it brings in this very different balance of muscles that then self-organizes in a different way. David.
And unmute. There we go. So what I've been experimenting, if I with my left, that was working easier, but I didn't have anything to press on. But I found that experimenting just now, if I rotated my elbow basically back outwards, can I show you? I'll exaggerate if I come to the correct side, because this is giving me non-mirror image. There we go. So
yeah,
not like that, but still straight, but then it rose. No, it didn't. Something to do with the orientation of the upper arm unlocked it.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that has something to do with the pulls, which I've seen a video of you doing, and I remember, and I do it with clients. You know, I do pulls kind of like that.
Yes.
Basically to kind of open up here. I've not thought of it as a specific technique. It's something that I came across in my training, but not again as a specific thing. And other teachers and so on, you know, they would do that sort of thing to get freedom in my shoulder and stuff like that. But I just noticed that slight rotation enabled, there we go, for this to go up. And I think that wasn't happening with my right, which just kept on going to about 30 degrees and jamming.
Yeah. You see, what you're doing here is you're linking up the muscle chains. You're linking up the fascial chains so that something can connect and integrate and balance, and then it can move.
And it's also, it's kind of almost the opposite to the unbendable arm thing, where, you know, if your elbow is down, then it's bendable. If it's rotated, it's not going to bend.
Yeah. So, I mean, who knows which, I'm not quite clear which is working for your arm at the moment. And in a sense, who cares? It's, you know, there's no right answer here.
Yes.
If whatever you're doing is connecting it up to move, then for the moment, that's appropriate for your body. Whether there is more refinement to bring to that down the line is another question. But right now, that's what's enabling. On the other hand, the right hand maybe has more, you know, complex because you're right-handed or whatever, and isn't linking up, and so it's not moving. And so this is the sort of thing that we explore hugely in the book study club, because we take it slowly. We start off by really exploring the eyes and the vision and the primary, just balance through the body and the freedom of the neck and so on, and the breathing. And then in part 2 of the book, we go in detail through all the muscle groups and really make sure that thank you, Serge. Every part of the muscle, every single muscle group is working and is available to those brain maps, those brainstem maps, the spinal cord, all those microcircuits in the spinal cord, so that they are available to our movement patterns and working with them until they get to the point where they will come in by themselves. And that's a lot of what we're working with. Sorry, I've got a frog. So, anyone like to ask any more questions or make any more comments before we finish? And I do hope, Anna.
I would like to buy this book, your book.
Yes. So, and you're in Hungary. So probably the easiest place for you to buy it is Amazon. If I'll send you an email afterwards, and I'll send you the title and so on. But if you put my name and the title into Amazon, it will come up.
Yeah.
Anyone who's in the UK or in America can order it very easily through the publisher themselves. But in Europe, it's easiest now because of Brexit. Really, Brexit. It's actually easier to get it through Amazon. So yes.
In Germany, I would like it German.
You'd like the German edition? Yes, it's hopefully going to be finally out this October. I haven't heard yet from Gabrielle how the latest update, but I mean, we've been waiting a long time for the German edition. But they've actually got a typesetter. They've employed a typesetter to do the final bits. So I don't know when, but hopefully sometime in October. So I'll send you the link with that for the edition. Yes. Yes. David.
Remind me, you're in Ireland?
I am, yes.
Where in Ireland?
Not far from Limerick on the west.
Limerick, okay.
Yeah.
I would probably like to come and see you if I come over there, which we've been planning recently. So
right, okay, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Penelope,
yes.
When are you thinking of doing the class? What day of the week?
Thank you for asking that one. Yes, it's on a Monday. It starts again on October the 9th, and it's 2:00 in the afternoon. So for Europeans, I don't know which time zone Norway is on, but I know for Germany and Hungary it's one hour ahead, so it would be 3 in the afternoon. Yes.
And is it recorded, Penelope? If you can't make the 2:00 time, is it recorded?
It is. It's always recorded, and so there are people I never see at all because they're always working. And they do it in the background. They just work from the seminars. They still have their study buddy. They can email me with any questions they have. And sometimes I then explore those in the group. Sometimes I just answer them if needed. So one can play it either way. So you still have the full support, and it's always wonderful when people can come to seminars. They say they're every 2 weeks, and we just work away. We take a break for Christmas and a break in the summer, but otherwise we work away every 2 weeks, and it becomes a very supportive group as well. It's
is it an hour, or what is it? An hour or an hour and a half?
It's an hour and a half. Yes, so it's 2 to 3:30, and then one. And people who are pupils, Franklin and Caroline, what I do, if I can, is fix you up with a teacher who wants a pupil to practice with, a teacher who's in the book study club who wants a pupil to practice with. And then you've got, rather than a study buddy, you actually work with the practice teacher, because you're, and Franklin, if you've done part of the training, you can make your choice whether you go as a pupil or a teacher.
And do you recommend to go to, we'll say if you're trying one of the techniques and it's just not working for you, just we'll say it was the arm one, what do you recommend then to be in touch with a practitioner to explore that bit more? Because if you can't get it right at home yourself.
Well, that's where having this practice teacher comes in, you see. That's where you'd be working with a teacher, and then their job is to, and this is something that comes up all the time with pupils after all, is to try and work out with you what's going on, to work with you, and to see if we can find the way through to getting that arm to lift. And if it still won't, then the teacher comes to one of the seminars and says, I can't get Caroline's arm to lift. And we say, what was happening? And we see if we can come up with some more ideas and maybe, well, actually, we need to wait till we've done this bit and then it will work, whatever. So we find the way round, and that's the skill of the teacher, is to take the method and actually, make it work with different people.
And when you buddy up with somebody, does that mean then that you meet them externally to the group as well? Or
yes. So you need, in order to do this, you need maybe half an hour of reading time to just read through and have a play with the exercises yourself. And then you need the time for the seminar, and then you need a little bit of time to, I think people often meet for an hour. That's what they tell me they do. And some people meet weekly and some people meet fortnightly. So each pair works it out what works for them. So one needs a little bit of time for this, but not hours and hours and hours. And people get, I mean, some of the partnerships that are formed with the study buddies, and they're still friends 2 years later. Because it can become a very deep partnership where you really get to know the other person, you know how to get things working for them. And some people work in groups of 3 as well, which gives, again, more breadth of experience. That can work for some people. Yeah. So who's thinking that this is appealing? Would you, David, do you think you might join? Lovely. And Anna Maria, lovely. And Franklin, marvelous. And yes, Anna, do you think you might? If we can, I mean, you can. I mean, I'm hoping that when the book in German finally comes out, and there's always lots of Germans in the group. So, and also, of course, if you're in Hungary, you've got Christina, who's worked out a lot of the language in Hungarian, which is a real bonus at this point, I think. Michelle, how are you doing there?
I'm interested and not able to commit at this time, but staying in the conversation. Yeah.
I think you'd love it if you could get in there, but let's see what happens. And as I say, if you want to give it a go and then see if it works, and you're also very welcome.
Thank you. Are you doing cohorts, sort of like a group that would begin and go through the whole book?
That's absolutely it. Exactly. So because we work successively, once we've got to sort of by the time we've done a couple of sessions, it's very difficult for people to join in. So it is very much a cohort that works through the book together. So, David.
Approximately how many on the course usually?
Well, I don't know how many will be on this course. Some courses we've had a lot on to start with. I mean, it was one course that started at 56 people. Mind you, a lot of those, a few dropped out straight away because they actually had taken on more than they could chew. But a lot of people actually were working in the background. So it ends up with round about between 10 and 15 people in seminars, which is a really manageable number. It can start with higher numbers and then drop down. Whether we'll get those sort of numbers this time, I think the last group started at 36 people, of which only 18 could ever make it to seminars. So it's not a huge number of people in the group. And as we go on, of course, that number dwindles. So simply because that's life. But a lot of people go on carrying on in the background. They get a bit behind with their partner, and then they're working sort of 2 or 3 seminars behind, and some more than that, but they take it at their own pace. So that actually works very well, because the people who are up to speed keep coming to seminars, and people are always welcome to seminars, whether they're up to speed or not. I mean, that's always, I do keep saying that. And so people do come along going, oh, I haven't read the last 2 chapters. It's fine. That's fine. Come along in, ask any questions. Because if one's asking review questions, there's always somebody saying, oh, thank God she asked that. So it's a very forgiving process. And people do take it at their own speed. Martha just appeared and disappeared. So, yeah. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Yeah. So, okay, right. Well, hello, Martha. Hello, Martha. You've come in just as we're finishing, I'm afraid. Good to see you. So thank you, everybody, for coming today. And I will send you all an email with links, and I'll also send you the recording of what we've done. And feel free to tell your friends as well, because sometimes people join with a friend who's then they're going to buddy up with, whether a fellow colleague or a daughter or whatever, if she's interested to do it with you. And if it's within the family, of course, there's only one payment needed. And yeah, take it from there. So
Thank you so much, Penelope. It's been really valuable.
good. I'm glad. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ruth. Yes, we didn't see you. Did you have any questions, Ruth, by the way? So we didn't see you in the foreground. And hello, Leslie, in the background there. Okay, so I will be in touch later on today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First time we
Thank you.
Zoom. That's a good one.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.